While his father Terah was still alive, Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans in the land of his birth. Abram and Nahor both married. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She was the daughter of Haran, the father of both Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was childless because she was not able to conceive. Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, son of Aaron, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and together they set out from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. When they came to Haran, they settled there. Terah lived 205 years, and he died in Haran. The call of Abram. The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out for Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Abram travelled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he went on towards the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. Then Abram set out and continued toward the Negev. This is the word of the Lord.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's good to be back. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Vinny. I was Associate Minister here for 8 years, and I'm now Vicar in St Andrew's over Hulston and St Bede's Morris Green, which is southwest of Bolton. But it's great to be together this evening as we begin this series. Let's just pray as we start. So, dear Lord, as we seek to step out in faith on the adventure of following you, guide us now as we reflect on your word. Amen. So, I've been given the task of starting our new sermon series, The Great Explorers, and reflecting on the great explorers of faith found in the Bible. But I want to begin this evening by sharing with you a short film clip from a famous modern-day explorer. The famous modern-day explorer that I want to share with you this evening is Bear Grylls. And he just explains in this clip his greatest adventure. So let's watch this film on the screen.
The truth is, the first step is always the hardest. That's the one that takes the most courage. But I've learnt not to run from that fear and just do it. My Christian faith can be a little up and down, like any relationship. It has struggles and it has doubts. But it's so often brought light to a dark path, warmth to a cold mountain, and strength to a failing body. I remember crawling onto the summit of Everest and clearing the snow from my mask to see the curvature of the earth at the edges. But finding a simple faith that empowers my life, to me, that's been my greatest adventure. Got questions about life? Try Alpha.
all of us yearn for adventure, don't we? We want to explore new places. And January is a time where often many of us book our summer holidays, and perhaps this year you've got dreams of exploring new places on your summer holidays. Maybe you're already looking forward to exploring new places on the holiday that you've booked this year. But actually, as Bear Grylls powerfully explains in that film, actually the Christian faith is the greatest adventure that we can experience in our lives. Yes, we can travel the world, we can go to far-off places, but actually the Christian faith is the greatest adventure that we can experience. And as we move beyond the sparkle of Christmas, as the New Year fireworks fade away, I wonder, are you ready in 2025 to be a great explorer? To live a life of adventure following Jesus and following God's great plan for your life. As an aside, just reflecting back on that film clip that we saw earlier, if you're not sure where to begin on your adventure of faith, if you want to kickstart your adventure of faith, your journey of faith, then actually the best way to do that is by joining the Alpha course, as Dan mentioned at the beginning of our service. And it's really encouraging that you've got an Alpha course starting here at St. Peter's. And I do encourage you, actually, if you're thinking, actually, I want to start that journey of faith, that adventure of faith, then sign up and do Alpha and see where God leads you this year. You'll hear more about Bear Grylls and his adventures of faith, and it's also a great place as well to meet with other people who want to explore the Christian faith, who want to begin that journey as well. So I'd really encourage you to join the Alpha course if you're able to. But to inspire you on your adventure of faith, as I shared earlier, tonight we're beginning a new sermon series, The Great Explorers, as we explore inspirational characters in the Bible who also embark on exciting adventures following wherever God leads them. And tonight we begin our series by looking at the first great explorer in the Bible, and that is, of course, Abraham, who, of course, was originally called Abram, but of course, later on, God gives him the name Abraham. So as we go through tonight, I'll be using his proper name rather than his original name. But actually, of course, Abraham is one of the greatest and most famous explorers of faith that we find in the Bible. I'm starting the series tonight, but actually next week we're going to be continuing looking at Abraham, because he's just such an amazing character to look at. But in our reading, as we begin our journey with Abraham, we come across Abraham at a really crucial point, not just for Abraham and his family, but also in the salvation history of the world. So let me explain. So in Genesis 6-9, we have the story of Noah. And of course, it's a world of wickedness, and there's only one faithful man, one faithful person that remains in the world, and that is, of course, Noah. And that's why God saves Noah and his family from the flood. They build the ark, and of course, they have a fresh start. God gives the world a fresh start, and Noah and his family are the ones that start off that new, fresh start in the world. And Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And God chose to work out his plans and purposes for the world through the family line of Shem, who, of course, was Noah's eldest. And that's really important, because actually, if you carry on reading after Genesis 9, you see that things start to go wrong again. Humanity starts to turn its back on God. We have the Tower of Babel, and actually God chooses to work out his plans and purposes through the family line of Shem. Now, fast forward a few generations, and Shem's family line as you can see on the screen, comes to Terah. And Terah had 3 sons, Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. And as we heard in our reading, the real danger, not just to Abraham, but also to God's plans and purposes as he's working out his salvation history, is that actually the family line at this point is in danger of dying out completely. So Haran dies, Nahor disappears, he gets lost in Ur, and of course Abraham, who is the firstborn of Terah, is 75 years old, and he's married to Sarai, who of course is unable to conceive. So actually you can see at this point, and this is why we got the family tree, sort of there is danger here for the family line of Shem, because it's in danger of dying out. And the family who God is working through, it's in danger of dying out, and that means God's plan of salvation history is in danger too. So to save the situation, not just for Abraham, but also the world, God has a great plan for Abraham. And God calls Abraham to go on an adventure, to go to a new land that God promises to them. Where God promises to Abraham in Genesis 12, verses 2 to 3, he says, "I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing, and all peoples will be blessed through you." And so God's great plan for Abraham and Sarai is that despite their challenges, despite their age, despite their problems conceiving, if they trust God and embark on this exciting new adventure, then God will not only enable their family line to continue, but actually God will continue to work out his great plan of salvation for the world. And actually, just to give you a little bit of a heads up, if you look in Matthew's Gospel, Matthew's Gospel begins with the genealogy of Jesus. And who does it start off with? It starts off with Abraham, doesn't it? So Jesus comes from the direct line of Abraham. And so actually the coming of Jesus fulfills God's final promise to Abraham, that all peoples will be blessed through his line. But actually the exciting news is that just as God had a great plan for Abraham, God has a great plan for us all. God, as we've already heard tonight, has a great plan for Craig and Elaine. And I'm so excited that they're going to Algiers, where God has called them. And I know that God will do great things through Craig and Elaine's ministry out there. But actually, God also has a great plan for you too. In my church at St. Andrew's over Bolton, we have a promise of God written above the main worship area. And it comes from Jeremiah 29, verse 11. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future." God has a plan for your life. God has an exciting adventure waiting for you. So I wonder, where is God wanting to lead you? Where is God wanting to lead you? Now, as I was preparing and thinking about this service tonight, I did have a little smile when I realized that Dan was leading the service alongside me. Many of you may know that Dan and I are good friends. We've known each other since we were kids at school. In fact, as I came in tonight, Val reminded me that actually we were both members of St. Andrew's toddler group as well, but that's another story. But actually, God has used our friendship over the years to reveal God's great plan for one another. So I just want to share a little bit about our story. After uni, Dan and I lost touch with one another for a few years because we moved to different parts of the country and we lost touch with one another. But actually, when Dan was working at St Helens Council, he discovered that actually I was a curate there and I was living in St Helens. So he got in touch with me and he said, do you want to meet up for lunch? And so actually we started having a pattern where every so often in St Helens we'd just meet up for lunch and have a bit of a catch-up. And for about 12 months we'd been doing this. And then I rang Dan and said, I need to meet you for lunch in St Helens. I've got something I want to ask you. And the reason was why I wanted to meet up with Dan is because I'd been approached about the job here at St Peter's Halliwell. And of course I knew Dan came here, I knew he came to Bower Bridge. I met up with Dan and I said, look, I've been approached about the job at St Peter's. Can you give me a little bit of a lowdown on it? Tell me what's going on in the church and so on. And so Dan shared a little bit of information and encouraged me about the amazing things that were happening here at St Peter's. Through that conversation, God assured me that this was the place that was part of God's great plan for my life. And so through it, after our conversation, I applied for the role, and I came to serve him here for 8 years as associate minister. I had to tell you a little bit of a funny story, actually, because when it was announced that I was coming here, Val went straight to Dan and said, do you guess who's going to be our new vicar at St. Peter's? And Dan said, it's Vinny, isn't it? And Val went, how did you know? Why didn't you tell me? But there you are. But Dan was very discreet, but there we are. But actually, the roles were reversed because a few years ago, Dan called me and said he wanted to meet up with me and pray with me. So I just moved to Overholton at the time, so he came over to St Andrew's Overholton, and he told me that he felt God was calling him to use his gifts of project management and planning within the church, and he felt called to apply for the Director of Transformation role within the diocese. And so Dan wanted to know what I thought, and he wanted to know a bit of the lowdown on the diocese. And I have to confess, I was honest with Dan, and I said that even though Dan would be brilliant at the job, I did have reservations for him working for the diocese. So whether he wanted to work for the diocese, it was another matter really, but there we are. But thankfully, Dan ignored my reservations about the diocese, and Dan took a step of faith, and he left his career in transport project management, and he joined the diocese and embarked on an exciting new journey. And I have to say, along with those of you who have seen Dan in action through Diocese Synod or various diocesan meetings, that actually Dan is doing an amazing job in his role at the diocese, particularly pushing forward mission and funding mission across our diocese, enabling the church to grow across Greater Manchester and fulfilling God's great plan for his life. So it's been a real joy to see how Dan's been flourishing in that role as he's been growing in that. But I share those stories because actually if God has a great plan for Dan and I, then God has a great plan for you too. God has an adventure in store for you. And actually, just think, actually God's great plan for Dan and I involved working for the church, but actually God's great plan for you may not be working in the church. It may be that it might be working in God's great plans and purposes for the world. So don't think that actually God's great plan is solely all about working within the church. Actually, God calls you sometimes to use your gifts, your abilities to serve him out in the world. So I wonder actually Where is God calling you? Where is his great plan for you? And here's another question to ponder. Just as God used Dan and I to reveal his great plan for our lives, I wonder, who is God using in your life to reveal God's great plan for you? My hope is that for you as a church community here at St. Peter's, we can all inspire and encourage one another as we discern God's great plan for each one of us, as we all seek to be great explorers of faith. So if God has a great plan and an adventure for all our lives, well, how then do we begin our great adventure? Well, as Bear Grylls shared on the film clip that I shared earlier, the first step is always the hardest. It does involve taking a step of faith. It involves going out into the unknown. It involves sacrifice. And that's exactly what Abraham had to do when he set out on his own adventure. As God revealed his great plan for Abraham, he also gives Abraham a challenge. In Genesis 12, verse 1, we read, "The Lord said to Abram, 'Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land where I will show you.'" So let's explore Abraham's first steps on his great adventure in more detail. Firstly, God called Abraham to leave behind his own land and people. Why does God call Abraham to do this? Well, actually, we read in Genesis how Abraham lived with his family in the cities of and Haran. And Haran were vibrant cities. Merchants and traders from near and far flocked to those cities to peddle their trade. Both cities were near fertile land, and so food was plentiful. And as a result, these cities were rich and affluent places to live. For those who lived in these cities, life was fairly comfortable, actually. It was a good place to live. It was a desirable place to live. And God's call to Abraham to leave these places, to leave these comfortable places, and to go to a new land was a really tough ask. That tested Abraham, because actually God called Abraham to leave behind his comfortable lifestyle and go to a brand new place. But actually there's good reason why God called Abraham to leave and Haran. In these attractive cities with many outside influences, polytheism and idol worship thrived. And one particularly important growing religion within these cities was the worship of the moon god Sin, which I think sums up the whole problem. Actually there was idol worship going on in these cities. And actually there was difficult cultures, subcultures, that were pulling people away from worshipping the one true God. I'm thinking back to Abraham and the family line of Shem that I spoke about earlier. Shem's line was not only in danger of dying out, but it was also in danger of moving away from its roots, of its faith in the one true God. God even speaks of this himself when years later, when he speaks to Joshua in Joshua 24, verse 2. He says, "Long ago your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the river Euphrates, and he worshipped other gods." Therefore, when God says to Abraham, "I will make you a great nation," but actually, first of all, you need to move away from your land. You need to move away from your people. The reason why God wants Abraham to move away from his land and his people is because actually there's this harmful culture of idol worship that is going on. And actually what God is saying is that actually you need to move away from those harmful sort of cultures. You need to come away to a new land. You need to be faithful to me as the one true God. And as we know, even though it was hard for Abraham to leave behind this really comfortable lifestyle and leave behind his land and his people, Abraham took the painful but necessary step of faith. Abraham followed God's instructions, and as a result, he began his great adventure. He began discovering God's great plan for his life. And so thinking about ourselves, I wonder, what is God calling you to leave behind as you look to embark on your own adventure of faith? Is there a challenging culture that you need to move away from, maybe in your workplace, or maybe a particular friendship group, so that actually you can remain faithful to God, and so that you can take that first step of faith into a new world as you discern God's great plan for you? May we have the courage to follow Abraham's example of faith. And may we not be afraid to leave behind those things as we seek our own great adventure of faith, as we seek to be great explorers ourselves. So we need to leave behind. But secondly, God called Abraham to let go of his family ties. God instructs Abraham to leave his father's household, to leave his family and his father's household. But actually, if you look at the reading, you'll notice that Abraham ignores this final instruction. You know, we build Abraham, don't we, as this great man of faith, but actually he made mistakes as well. And this was the big mistake that he made, because he ignored this final bit. Even though Abraham has the faith to leave his land, his people, he actually allows Lot and the family entourage to accompany him as they journey to Canaan, the land that God promised to Abraham. So why does Abraham ignore this final instruction? Why does he leave his land and his people, but actually he doesn't leave behind his family? He takes his nephew Lot. Why does he take his father's entourage? Well, maybe Abraham doesn't completely trust God's promise, that despite their age and their inability to have children, maybe Abraham and Sarai are taking Lot as an insurance policy, that actually if they don't have children, well, maybe their nephew Lot will have children, and that actually God will work out his plans and purposes through him. Of course, we know, if we follow the story, that actually Abraham and Sarah do give birth to a son. They give birth to Isaac. But more on that a little bit later. But whatever reason Abraham ignored this instruction, Abraham's failure to follow God's commands creates trouble for Abraham later. Because if you look at Genesis chapter 13, Abraham and Lot begin quarreling over the land that God has given them. And they end up splitting the land which God promised to them. All because Abraham failed to follow God's command, and he failed to let go of his family roots. You know, thinking about ourselves, sometimes when God calls, there are things in our lives that we need to let go of, but actually we take them along anyway. And ultimately, those things that we fail to let go of in our lives are the things that prevent us from fulfilling our calling and realizing God's great plan for us. You know, Jesus himself makes it clear that actually if we want to follow him and experience our own great adventure of faith, we need to be prepared to let go of everything else. Jesus said to his disciples these words from Matthew 16, verse 24. He says, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me." I wonder, what is God calling you to let go of as you seek to begin your own great adventure of faith and go wherever God is leading you? So I want to leave you with this. I believe God has a great adventure for you in 2025. I believe God has a great plan for you. I believe God is calling you to be a great explorer. But the question is, do you have the courage to step out in faith, to take that first step of leaving behind, of letting go, and going wherever God leads you? May Abraham and the other great explorers of faith that we'll explore in this series, may they inspire us all to take these steps of faith as we go through the coming year. Amen.